Summit County Court of Common Pleas is again in session. The Honorable Christy Gurgey presiding.
Thank you. You may be seated. Call your next witness.
Thank you, Judge. We call Dr. Kohler to the stand.
Dr. Kohler, would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat. Once you're seated and comfortable and settled, if you'll remove your mask and then testify into the microphone, keep your voice up, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, doctor. If you would, please introduce yourself to the jury, tell them your full name, and then spell your last name for the court reporter.
I'm Dr. Lisa Kohler, Kohler. I am the Chief Medical Examiner for the County of Summit.
And as the Chief Medical Examiner for the County of Summit, what are your duties?
I determine the cause and the manner of death of individuals who die suddenly and unexpectedly or due to an injury or poisoning when they are in Summit County.
And just because there's so much terminology and people hear on TV so much about coroners, you said you're the Chief Medical Examiner. How does a medical examiner differ from a coroner?
In the state of Ohio, we have two counties that have a medical examiner system, Summit County and Cuyahoga County. The other 86 counties have coroners. All of us are physicians, but the coroners are elected to their position and need to run for office every 4 years. Myself and Dr. Gilson are appointed to the position by our county executives and serve at the pleasure of the executive. And as a medical examiner, it is preferred that we be a forensic pathologist, whereas the other 86 coroners are physicians. They are not necessarily trained in forensic pathology.
And that's significant because in order to do autopsies, it's important to have forensic pathology experience, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so there are some counties that have an elected doctor who cannot perform autopsies. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And they come to you or Cuyahoga County at times to perform those autopsies for them.
Yes, some of the county coroners employ forensic pathologists like myself to do the autopsies, but other counties who do not have the facilities or do not have a forensic pathologist will contract with a larger county who has those services available.
All right, and since we've talked about the importance of a forensic pathologist, what is a forensic pathologist?
A forensic pathologist is a physician who has received training in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology and has become board certified in both areas. So we're knowledgeable in doing an autopsy, collecting evidence, determining cause and manner of death, and presenting evidence in court.
And you said you're the chief, so how many people are in your office? How many doctors are in your office?
There are a total of 3 of us, myself and 2 others.
All right, and that would be deputies or assistant medical examiners?
Yes, a chief deputy medical examiner and a deputy medical examiner.
All right. And as a chief medical examiner, and I guess your office, do you do autopsies or perform autopsies on every person that dies within the county?
No, we do not.
And how is that determined, which people have autopsies done on them?
The Ohio Revised Code indicates which deaths fall under our jurisdiction. So basically, it's anybody who has an injury or a poisoning, or anybody who's dying suddenly without a medical explanation for why they are dying. So we will handle any death that is not natural, so a homicide, a suicide, an accident, but we do handle some natural deaths where a physician has not been taking care of that person for any medical illnesses and they are dying and no one else in the community can sign that death certificate.
And approximately how many autopsies does your office perform each year?
We perform approximately 700 exams each year.
And so let's go back and talk a little bit just about your qualifications in order to, tell us about your background, training, and education.
I received my undergraduate degree from the University of Toledo. That was a Bachelor of Science in Biology. From there, I went on to the Medical College of Ohio, which is now the medical campus of the University of Toledo, where I received my medical degree. After receiving my medical degree, I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and attended the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center for anatomic and clinical pathology and became board certified in both areas. And then I completed my training in Richmond, Virginia at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for forensic pathology and became board certified there.
And once you left or got board certified there in Richmond, Virginia, where did you go after that?
I came back to Ohio and began working as a deputy medical examiner at the Summit County Medical Examiner's Office.
And you've been there ever since?
Yes, sir.
So how many years has that been?
Approximately 22.
And you were a deputy. At what point did you become the chief?
I became the chief in April of 2001.
So pretty much 22 years now you've been the chief?
Since April of 2001, I've been, so about 20 years.
Okay. Oh, 2001, I apologize. Thank you. In that period of time or in your career, how many autopsies, if you know, or approximate, have you performed?
I've performed over 3,500 autopsies in my career, and I've supervised many more of them.
All right. And you had told us that one of the primary functions that you perform is to determine the cause and manner of death.
Yes, sir.
So explain to us what that means.
The cause of death is the injury or the illness that results in that person's death. The manner of death describes the circumstances of death. We, as a medical examiner, have 5 choices. A clinician can only choose natural for those individuals who are dying from an infection or a malignancy or cancer or some other sort of natural disease, heart disease. We also have the option of choosing accident for an injury or a poisoning that's resulting in the person's death that was unintentional, suicide when a person is causing a self-injury or poisoning to cause their own death or injury, homicide when someone else causes the death of an individual, and undetermined if we cannot distinguish between 2 competing manners of death.
All right, and so if somebody is shot to death by another person, the cause would be?
Would be a gunshot wound.
And the manner would be?
Homicide.
Okay. So, just so the jury knows the basics, what do you do when you perform an autopsy?
When I perform an autopsy, I first have basic information about the circumstances that we know about this deceased individual. I will then go back and take photographs of this person in the condition as they are received, with their clothing on, any therapeutic interventions that were applied to that person. So we photograph the person as is. We will collect any evidence that we may need based upon what the circumstances tell us about the case. And then we will undress the individual, we will collect any evidence as needed, and re-photograph the individual. Once we're ready to begin the internal examination, we're going to draw some fluids. We typically will get blood, we'll get vitreous from the eyes, we can keep stomach contents if it's something we feel is necessary, we get urine to drug test people, and any other samples that we might decide are necessary based on the case. We will do an internal exam where we make an incision starting at each shoulder, down to the chest, down to the pubic bone to expose all of the organs in the main part of the body. And if there are injuries on the outside of the body, we're going to correlate those injuries to what's going on inside of the body, looking for any disease and documenting that disease process as well. We also will look inside at the head. So we'll make an incision from ear to ear across the scalp, move the scalp away from the skull, open the skull, and look at the brain so we can look for any injuries or disease processes there. We will submit fluids for toxicology to see drugs and alcohol and what they're present. If we need to do cultures, we can submit that. We will get all of the information back, and we are going to create a final report and a final death certificate based on those findings.
And in also doing your determination of cause and manner of death, do you rely on outside sources?
Yes, my investigators will reach out to law enforcement and hospital and other medical entities to gather information about the person and about the incident. And they will provide us with those reports and that information. And if we as the pathologists have questions that need to be asked of those individuals, my investigator typically is that person who goes out and requests that additional information from other agencies so that we have that for review.
Is it fair to say that, there's sometimes where determining how a person died, whether it's homicide, suicide, accidental, is something you can't tell just from a physical examination and autopsy. Is that fair?
That's true. We rely very heavily on the investigative information and the circumstances to determine the difference between the various manners of death.
And so, for an example, somebody is found in their home with a gunshot wound to their head. If you just look at that person, you see a gunshot, you don't know if it was self-inflicted or somebody else did it unless you get information regarding an investigation and the circumstances, correct?
Correct.
Okay. One of the things that I believe you will say is not part of your job is to determine who the person is if it was at the hands of another person. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay. So your only determination is was it a homicide or wasn't it a homicide, not who did it?
Right. We determine what happened to that person and classify it by manner, but we don't get into who caused that injury to happen.
All right. And let's talk now about the reason we're here today, and that's the deaths of Gloria Hart and Lindell Lewis. Did you have the opportunity to make a determination in their cases as to the cause and manner of death?
Yes, I did.
All right. So let's talk specifically, since both individuals come from the same incident, we've combined them together. I think you put together a little bit of a PowerPoint to discuss that. So first of all, you're aware that the individuals, Gloria Hart and Lindell Lewis, were found at 719 Fulton Street, and were there, and there was a house fire at that location. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm gonna, we're showing you, this PowerPoint is States Exhibits 62, and it's on a thumb drive. It is, in this PowerPoint, there's 9 slides. Slide A, or the first slide, is a title page. I'm saying this for the record. So let's go to slide number 2. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Okay, slide number 2 is showing a photograph of the house where the fire took place, and in the upper corner there you can see both of the individuals, Gloria Hart and Lindell Lewis, as they're found deceased within the home.
All right. And so this is important to you, the location of where they were found and the circumstances surrounding it. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now you have, going to slide number 3, we've asked you to explain to us and to this jury some of the effects of fires and what that has on the human body. Can you do that for us?
Yes, within a house fire, you may wonder, well, why didn't this person get out of the house? Why were they having trouble getting away? And one of the things that I've learned from my colleagues that do the fire investigations is that smoke fills the house very rapidly, particularly if you're opening a window in order to try and escape. As you open the window and more oxygen comes into the room fills with very dark black smoke very rapidly, and you can no longer see where you're going, and you have difficulty in navigating. Also, the longer you're in that fire and the more you're breathing in the smoke, one of the things that you're breathing in is carbon monoxide. The carbon monoxide has a major effect on how well you're able to think and how well you're able to function. And because of that, you can't see where you're going, and you're getting disoriented because of the effects of the carbon monoxide. It can impair a person's ability to escape that fire.
And let's go to slide number 4. So here you just talked a little bit about this, right? Carbon monoxide and the effects of it. And then you told us the effects it has on you, but I believe on this slide here it talks about, and you have a slide that says, how does it kill you? How does CO kill you? Tell us about that.
Yes, so carbon monoxide is an odorless and colorless gas. And you may be familiar with sometime in the wintertime, people have a malfunctioning furnace, and carbon monoxide will escape and can cause the individuals to die. Well, typically, if they're found while they're still able to be resuscitated, they've got a list of complaints, lots of headaches, weakness, they may be vomiting, chest pain, they're confused. What's happening with the carbon monoxide is your blood is meant to carry oxygen to your tissues, including your brain and your heart. And there is a chemical in your red blood cells called hemoglobin that holds the oxygen as it transports it initially from your lungs out to your body. When carbon monoxide is present, it holds on to that hemoglobin molecule much more strongly than oxygen does. And so it's taking up the space that oxygen would. So even if you've got enough oxygen in the environment that would normally support life, if carbon monoxide is there, it's just taking all the space the oxygen would. So it keeps you from getting the oxygen to your brain and to your heart and any of the other organs. So it just rapidly overwhelms the system and causes the issues that we've described.
And going to slide number 5 of the exhibit, does this help explain a little bit further? Is this the diagram here?
Yes, so as you're breathing, deep down in your lungs, there's some very small spaces where the oxygen gets pulled out of the air and crosses over into the blood vessels. And at the same time, the carbon dioxide that we breathe out is crossing out of the blood vessels into the air so we can breathe out and remove that from our system. So when we have that carbon monoxide coming in with the oxygen, the carbon monoxide is kind of a bully. It's pushing all the oxygen spaces away, and it's taking up all the seats on the red blood cells. So those red blood cells are leaving the lung and going out to the body, but it doesn't have the oxygen the body needs to carry on its business.
Okay, so let's take a break from the slideshow, and I want to talk about specifically the autopsy you did on these individuals. So starting with Ms. Hart, did you personally, in fact, perform the autopsy on Ms. Hart?
I did.
And please walk us through that. Now, you actually, after you do the autopsy, you then memorialize that in a report. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so what you're going to testify to, you put into a report, but of course it probably has a lot of terminology and information that we probably don't know how to interpret. So I'm going to ask you to go through the report with us and explain to us what we're seeing, what they're going to see if they get this report. Okay?
Yes.
All right, so first of all, the first thing you do, I think you already told us and explained that you're going to do an examination, clothing, and then you take them, wash them down, and clothe them. And I'm assuming you did that process for both Ms. Hart and Mr. Lewis.
Yes, I did.
All right, so then take us from there. What did you do? What happened next with Ms. Hart?
So as we're looking at Ms. Hart, we've weighed her and measured her, so we know that she's 5'7" and weighs 160 pounds. And she's basically a normal individual in her appearance, other than having some soot on the skin surfaces and in her airways. I documented what clothing she was wearing. She was in her pajamas, and that there was no medical therapies applied to her. So it was covering all of her exposed skin areas. It was in her mouth and down into the bronchial tree, which is the breathing airways. And she had a little bit of burn injury on the skin of the face with some skin starting to slough off. As I did the internal examination, her heart was mildly enlarged, but not a huge amount. Her blood vessels were all wide open, so the heart was really relatively healthy. The lungs looked pretty healthy other than the soot in the airways. Her abdominal organs all looked to be normal, as did her kidneys, and she has had a previous tubal ligation of her fallopian tubes. So basically, aside from the smoke inhalation, her body was pretty healthy.
All right. And, as far as a lot of people think, oh, somebody, died in a fire, a lot of times people think, oh, they were caught on fire and they died. you don't die from the burns, or they didn't die from the burns in this case, correct?
Correct. In this situation, they are dying from inhaling all of the smoke and having a high level of carbon monoxide in their system.
All right. And for you as a doctor, how do you determine it? How do you see that?
Well, we will see the soot lining the airways because we're taking out the throat organs and taking out the lungs, and we can see the black soot deep down into the airways. But we also draw blood samples and we submit that to our toxicologist, and he can determine how much carbon monoxide is in that blood sample and can tell us what that percentage is.
All right, so let's talk about that. You had said that during autopsy, one of the protocols you use is to take fluids, different types of fluids from individuals to do testing. Is that one of the things that you did here for the carbon dioxide levels?
Carbon monoxide, yes.
Monoxide, I'm sorry, yes. And you did that here?
Yes, sir.
And was there a result for Ms. Hart?
Yes. Gloria Hart had a carbon monoxide concentration of 73.4%.
And what significance does that have, that level? And let me actually move to the next slide here.
And so, Dr. Kohler, that screen to your right is on a phone
Oh.
arm that has the PowerPoint.
I'm not going to think of it. There we go.
That helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just realized.
So, Doctor, I'm going to move to slide number 6 of your slide, of your presentation. So does this talk a little bit about that, those levels and the significance of it?
Yes, this is a chart that was taken from a forensic pathology text, which shows how as the percent of carbon monoxide or carboxyhemoglobin in the blood increases, there are symptoms associated with that. And I have a red box around the 30 to the 60 to 70% here. So at 30%, you start having headaches, fatigue, and judgment is disturbed. There's dizziness and dimness of vision. In an elderly person, 30% is enough to cause death. In a younger, healthier person, 30% is just going to cause impairment. As we increase that percentage of carboxyhemoglobin, you start seeing more headaches, confusion, and the likelihood of collapse. But at 60 to 70%, unconsciousness is present, respiratory failure happens, so they stop breathing, and if death will happen if the exposure continues. So with the 73.4%, she has reached the upper levels of this where she then stops breathing and death follows.
And I see you have a notation on the side there that the average, was it carboxyhemoglobin levels for people that die in house fires is 57%.
Yes, sir.
All right, so she was significantly higher than that.
Yes, she was.
As far as that measurement goes, if a person passes away in that house fire, does that level continue to go up just by being in that house with the fire and the smoke until they're removed by the firemen or rescuers?
No, the level will only continue to rise while that person is breathing and their heart is pumping. Once they stop breathing and their heart stops pumping, i.e. they're dead, that level is going to stay stable.
All right. In Ms. Hart's case, and let me go back. You find somebody such as this in a house that has been on fire. You find them. Is it possible that they could have died from a heart attack?
Yes, that is possible.
All right, so let's say they were trying to get out of the house and they had a bad heart, they have a heart attack. You'd be able to determine that, would you not?
We would be able to document that they had significant heart disease. If they are dying of a heart attack that's happening during the fire, many times we can't see evidence of that heart attack at that point. But we would see the evidence of significant coronary artery disease and probable previous infarction or heart attack evidence.
All right, and you didn't see anything like that. I think you testified that pretty much you had a little bit of an enlarged heart, but nothing of significance, and that the only thing you saw, that otherwise she was relatively healthy.
Yes, sir.
One of the other things you did is you did a toxicology on her, I think it were urine samples, is that correct from your report?
Yes, urine and blood.
All right. And so you have an actual toxicologist on staff too at your office, fair?
I do.
And did the toxicologist then test her urine sample and then report that back to you?
Yes, he did.
And what, if any, results were there for Ms. Hart?
The toxicology testing showed that the urine contained cocaine metabolites, and when we checked with the blood, there was alcohol present in the blood at a 0.196%, and the blood drug screen showed the metabolite of cocaine, which is benzoylecgonine, at 1,024 nanograms per ml.
And so you said that you found the alcohol in her blood.
Yes, sir.
All right. And so that number, I think you said, was 1.9?
0.196.
0.19, I'm sorry. And is that the typical, like when we hear about DUIs and stuff, is that measurement the same?
Yes.
Okay. So she would have been above the legal limit to drive.
Correct.
All right. Now, cocaine, she has cocaine in her system. Are you in any, I know you quantified it with a number, but does that have any significance to you as far as her, the way she died?
The significance of the cocaine in her system is that that would impair her judgment above and beyond the level of the carbon monoxide that she had. So she was actively intoxicated at the time with both the alcohol and the cocaine, which would affect her ability to make decisions and to act appropriately in the face of any sort of emergency.
And doctor, you probably more than you like see cases of people that overdose or die from drugs. And I know that term overdose is probably not your favorite, but is that fair? Is that true?
Yes, we see a fair number of overdose deaths.
All right. And I said overdose. You don't use that term because why?
We typically use toxicity because it's a toxic effect of the drug on the system. The types of drugs we're seeing, there's no therapeutic amount, so it's not an overdose of a drug. It's a toxic effect of an illicit drug.
Okay, so like cocaine, there's no normal dosage for cocaine.
Correct.
Okay. In seeing all these overdose cases, how can you determine or make a determination that it wasn't from drugs and alcohol that she passed versus the fire, or versus the results of the fire?
In this situation, she has a very high carboxyhemoglobin, so she was alive long enough in order to breathe in the smoke to get a 73% carboxyhemoglobin, and that is the reason why she is expiring as opposed to the presence of the cocaine in her system.
All right. And we'll just, in slide 7 of 9, I think essentially gives us the information you had just testified about. Is that correct?
Yes.
And now talking about, well, let's finish with Ms. Hart. Ultimately, in your report, did you, or before you did your report, were you able to learn information from outside sources regarding how this fire started?
Yes, we were able to get a report from the arson investigators that indicated that the fire had been set by another individual.
So an intentionally set fire helps you to make that determination as to the manner of death. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
All right. So ultimately, with all the information you had collected and from your physical autopsy and toxicology, were you able to make a determination as to cause and manner of death for Gloria Hart?
Yes, I did.
And what was that determination?
The cause of death for Gloria Hart was soot and smoke inhalation. The manner of death was homicide, and how injury occurred is breathed in smoke from an intentionally set house fire.
And is that opinion that you've given here today regarding Gloria Hart within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I'm going to show you when we marked as State's Exhibit number 61. May I approach, Judge?
You may.
take a look at that and tell me if you recognize that.
Yes, State's Exhibit 61 is a copy of the autopsy report of Gloria Hart, and it includes the toxicology report as well.
Now I'm just going to put this up here for a second here. Well, I'll hold off on that. We'll do that at the end. Okay, let's move to Mr. Lindell Lewis. You also received the remains of Mr. Lindell Lewis on that occasion too, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you did similar to, as you did with Ms. Hart, you performed an autopsy in the same manner and method, is that true?
Yes, it is.
And could you, and I guess I'll go ahead and show you State's Exhibit number 63 for identification purposes. If you would take a look at this and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, State's Exhibit 63 is the autopsy report of Lindell Lewis, and it also includes the toxicology report.
All right, and both 61 and 63 are not the actual, of course, they're copies of the reports that are certified in the file, is that fair?
Correct.
But they are accurate copies.
Yes, sir.
All right, so if you would, just as you did with Ms. Hart, would you please walk through with the jurors so if they were to see this document, they would understand what happened and what you're reporting here?
Okay, for the autopsy of Lindell Lewis, again, we start with the demographics. He was a 65-year-old male who was 5 foot 11 inches long and weighed 266 pounds. He did have soot-like material in his mouth and nose. He had several scars present. He had a scar on the front of his chest from what's called a median sternotomy from prior heart surgery, a scar on the left upper chest from a pacemaker being implanted, and some drainage tube scars on his abdomen, and scars on his hips from remote hip surgery, and on his left anterior forearm, so on the front of his left arm. As I looked at him, just like with Ms. Hart, there was soot-like material covering the exposed skin and in the mouth and nose, and he also had some mild thermal injury. As I looked inside at the different organs and cavities, he had some significant heart disease in that his heart was very much enlarged. It's roughly twice the size that it should be, and the left ventricle was very thick. He had some severe coronary artery disease, which resulted in needing to have some bypass grafts performed, and the bypass grafts were patent. The heart was dilated. The lungs were relatively healthy, but they did show the soot in the airways, as we saw in his heart. The liver looked to be pretty normal, and the rest of the organs were the only change that I saw was in the kidneys. There were changes consistent with having had high blood pressure. And as I looked at the head, there were no bruising in the scalp and no bleeding inside of the head.
And I'm going to show you slide number 8 of 9. But before I do that, did you also have an opportunity to test him for carbon monoxide?
Yes, sir.
And what was the result of that test?
His carboxyhemoglobin was 57.5%.
All right, showing you slide number 8 of 9. And I think that summarizes a lot of what you've just told us here. 57%, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I did not ask you about his toxicology report, but you did a toxicology report on him as you did with Gloria Hart.
Yes, sir.
And what, if any, results did you obtain? obtained from that test?
The urine screen was negative for drugs, and the blood alcohol was also negative, so he had no drugs or alcohol on board at the time of the fire.
All right. And in this photograph, you're identifying for us the scarring that you had already noted in your report.
Yes, so he's got the scar on the middle of his chest from having had remote bypass surgery. His heart was enlarged from high blood pressure, and he had a pacemaker. Although I don't have an arrow to it, there's a bulge on the upper left part of his chest there where the pacemaker sat. And then he also had the hip surgery scar that was from a somewhat recent surgery.
Okay. And Mr. Lewis had a 57% level. Hers was 73. Is there any significance to the disparity between the two numbers for each of them, since they were both in the same room, same fire?
The biggest issue I would see here is that Ms. Hart was healthier than Mr. Lewis. As I mentioned, Mr. Lewis had a very enlarged heart. He's had prior blood vessel bypasses to his heart. So he is going to succumb to a lower level of carbon monoxide, as evidenced by the fact it was 57%. That's still high enough to cause death, particularly in someone who is impaired by having heart disease. But it shows that he did not breathe in as much of the smoke as she did for as long as she did, because his body was not healthy enough to keep him breathing that long.
And of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, these numbers, the fact that his is lower does not mean that he died first, does it?
No, it just indicates that his body died before he had time to breathe in as much soot. I don't know the exact timing, whether that's seconds before Gloria passed, or if it's minutes before, or if they're both surviving the same amount of time and just he's taking fewer breaths.
And there's a lot of variables to that too, isn't there?
Yes, sir.
If somebody's standing and breathing in more smoke versus on the ground getting less smoke and things of that nature changes the timing of how the intake is, correct?
Yes, and the amount of activity of the individual as to how quickly are they breathing. So it's not possible to know the timing of one versus the other as to when they passed.
All right. Other than the things that you've just told us about, is there anything else of significance that you found in Mr. Lewis's autopsy?
No, sir.
And similarly to Ms. Hart, you received information from outside sources regarding the fire. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And did you rely on that the determination by the arson investigator that it was an intentionally set fire to come to a determination for Lindell Lewis?
Yes, sir, I did.
And so you made a determination as to cause and manner of death for Mr. Lewis?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
The cause of death was soot and smoke inhalation. The manner of death was homicide, and how injury occurred is breathed in smoke from an intentionally set house fire.
All right. And I believe in slide number 9, that summarizes what you've just told us. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And that opinion that you've given us regarding Mr. Lewis, is that within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, it is.
Doctor, thank you. I appreciate it. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. McFadden. Gentlemen?
Just, we don't have any questions.
All right, Dr. Kohler, I understand you're coming back in a week or two. So I'll just remind you that I have other witnesses. Please don't discuss the nature of your testimony here today or any ongoing testimony that you may present in the future, unless it's in participation or anticipation with counsel. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Kohler. You're excused. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that we've concluded a little earlier than we anticipated, which is why we moved Dr. Kohler's testimony up today. We are where we expected to be, just some people didn't take as long as we thought they would, testimony-wise. So we are going to take our break. I'll remind you, I'm going to give you the admonition, and then we're going to talk about scheduling. So remember the admonition I've given you at all of your breaks. It's important that you be fair and attentive throughout the trial. Do not discuss the case amongst yourself with anyone else, including family, friends, and the media. You must not post or read anything about this case on the internet or any electronic device, including your cell phones. Any such discussion, if discovered, could lead to a mistrial and would severely compromise the party's right to a fair trial. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence, and do not form or express an opinion until the case has finally been submitted to you. So as you know, Monday's a holiday, so the court is closed. And Tuesday, we made our modifications regarding our half day to accommodate some schedules and some other things. So you're going to actually have a 4-day weekend, so to speak, and we will then resume testimony on Wednesday, the 8th of September, and again, we won't be starting till 9:45 that morning, so if you'll be here about 9:30, and then juror number 7, whenever you get here, we'll start, okay? I don't think you're too far away, so I think that's why I said 9:45. It's between 9:45 and 10, we'll be fine, all right? And then I honestly, so, you know, we're pretty significantly into this. I hope you all stay healthy and safe, right? Keep our bubbles small, so to speak, and then we'll see everybody back here on Wednesday. Thank you. We're adjourned. Your notepads upside down on your chairs.
All rise, please.